This is the story of a beautiful, wealthy couple. A young American named Joe and a Russian beauty named Olga. They had just gotten married and set off to the Virgin Islands to spend their honeymoon on the beach. It was a paradise-like place, and life seemed perfect. However, the happy couple had no idea that the countdown had already begun, and they only had 107 days of wedded bliss left. The Connell family lived in Wilmington, Delaware, USA. There were 3 children in the family, but eventually the parents divorced, which came as a heavy blow to everyone. The children stayed with their mother. The eldest child was named John, the middle one Joseph, and the youngest was a girl named Kelly. As kids, they were a pretty noisy bunch and often quarreled over trivial things. But as they grew older, they found common ground and became very close. Their mother later got into a new relationship with a man who became like a second father to them. The family lived in a comfortable and quiet neighborhood and were well off enough to enjoy a good life without any major worries. The middle son, Joseph, whom everyone called Joe, grew into an ambitious young man. At times, he could be overly meticulous, but only when it came to business. At home, he was considered the life of the party, always boosting the fun in any group and very sociable. Joe was doing well. He co-owned an auto repair shop and store with one of his best friends, Christopher. Their partnership was successful. They were passionate about their business and eager to grow it. During this time, Joe met Olga online, a young woman from Russia. Both of them were in their 30s and had already been burned in past relationships, so they were now looking for true love. They hit it off quickly, thanks to their friendly and vibrant personalities. Everyone around them loved them. Joe was a committed bachelor. He never thought he'd meet a woman who could completely change his life. But Olga, a stunning blonde, did just that. They spent hours talking every day and grew extremely close. Eventually, Olga traveled to the U.S. from Siberia. Joe wasn't disappointed when he met her in person. He was enchanted by her beauty and gentle nature. The feeling was mutual. Olga liked Joe just as much. They started dating, and their relationship developed rapidly. Joe's family quickly grew fond of the Russian beauty their son seemed smitten with. She seemed delicate and shy at first, but beneath that exterior was a strong, energetic, and capable woman. The whole family loved her. She appeared to be the one who could finally settle Joe down. Of course, Olga hadn't come to America for no reason. Joe had promised to marry her. So they decided to have a wedding relatively soon. But that's when the problems started. The first issue was the engagement ring. By tradition, the mother of the family wanted to pass down her ring to her son. But it had already been given to Joe's sister, Kelly, who had gotten married 10 years earlier. The ring was a very expensive one, worth around $20,000, because it was encrusted with diamonds. Joe secretly replaced the diamonds in Kelly's ring with cubic zirconia and returned it to her, then had the diamonds reset into a new engagement ring for Olga. The plan was to later switch the stones back and return the real diamonds to Kelly's ring, hoping neither woman would notice. Of course, there was no intent to deceive Kelly. They fully intended to return her diamonds. But things dragged on, and eventually Kelly did notice the difference. She was upset and confronted Joe. Joe was hurt. He felt his sister was trying to break tradition and was angry about it. The wedding ceremony took place on the U.S. Virgin Islands, but Kelly didn't attend because she was still upset and had to work that day. Still, she found time to send a few snarky messages to Olga about the engagement ring. Olga, unaware of what Joe had done with the jewelry, was hurt by the hostility. Just a few weeks after the wedding, someone broke into the young couple's home while they were at work. The burglars stole a large number of valuables and family heirlooms. However, the diamond ring was on Olga's finger at the time, so it was spared. Joe called the police, who investigated the scene. Surprisingly, no evidence was found. It raised suspicions. Had there really been a robbery, or was it staged? But the investigation would never reach a conclusion. Something far more serious was about to happen to the couple. Sadly, fate had other plans. Their happily ever after would be cut short. Their life together began on the Virgin Islands, in the Caribbean, where they celebrated their honeymoon. They enjoyed the ocean, the sun, and each other. They went fishing, sailed turquoise waters on a yacht, and tasted exquisite. The family had more than enough money, so they didn't deny themselves anything during their honeymoon. On their way back home, the young couple purchased a brand new Mercedes convertible worth over $100,000. The head of the newly formed family could easily afford it, being a co-owner of a rapidly growing company related to the automotive industry, which was bringing in around $1 million a year. Olga was a former stock trader, so she understood economics and finance very well. She quickly became part of her husband's business, taking on the role of administrator. A charming Russian blonde with an accent, she was friendly, presentable, and helped the family business grow. Everything was perfect until the day tragedy struck. On September 23, 2001 *, just 3 months after the wedding, gunshots rang out at the couple's home in Wilmington. Around 2 a.m., a 911 call came in reporting a woman who had been shot near a condominium in a residential complex. At that moment, she was still alive. Paramedics arrived within minutes and gave first aid to Olga, the victim of the attack. She had suffered multiple gunshot wounds and was losing blood quickly. Despite the desperate attempt to save her, Olga died on the way to the hospital. While inspecting the crime scene, police found another body near the first victim. Joseph was lying in the bushes, shot execution style in the back of the head. It didn't look like a random robbery. The couple had been ambushed from behind. Detectives quickly put together the circumstances based on the evidence. Officers believed a previous burglary at their home might have been connected to this tragic ending. All nearby witnesses and neighbors were questioned. Many had heard gunshots but didn't see anything, so they couldn't provide concrete leads. Some witnesses reported hearing 2 loud male voices arguing shortly before the shooting. It seemed there had been some kind of confrontation between 2 men and the couple, possibly after Joseph and Olga returned from a bar where they had celebrated Olga's 39th birthday. Friends and some of Joseph's family had gathered for the celebration. They partied and danced until late, then drove home after midnight in their convertible, parking near the entrance to the condominium, unaware that death was waiting for them. Olga had several gunshot wounds to the face. 1 bullet went through her cheek and exited the back of her head. Joseph was riddled with bullets, including 1 in the head, as he lay lifeless in the bushes. While Olga was still alive, officers tried asking her questions, hoping for a clue about the shooter, but she was unresponsive. Nearby, police found a large number of spent shell casings of different calibers, confirming that multiple firearms had been used. It was unlikely that one person used multiple guns, especially since around 20 rounds had been fired. This pointed to multiple attackers. Robbery was ruled out quickly. The victim's belongings remained untouched. Joseph still had his wallet full of cash. Olga's handbag with her phone and valuables was right beside her, and she still wore an expensive wedding ring worth tens of thousands of dollars. The police concluded this was a planned ambush, an intentional attack on a young couple. When the investigation began, detectives interviewed Joseph's family. His mother and stepfather insisted the couple had no enemies, or at least had never mentioned any problems. However, one fact soon came to light. Joseph had a conflict with his sister over a piece of jewelry. This became a point of interest for investigators. Some suspected Kelly, his sister, might have killed them out of revenge over the lost jewelry. But this theory faltered when it was revealed that the ring hadn't been stolen. It was still on Olga's hand. What stood out was that Kelly was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene, despite living in a different part of town. She seemed emotionally unaffected. Kelly actively spoke with detectives and was open about her conflicts with her brother, even showing angry text exchanges she'd had with both Joseph and Olga. It was clear that Olga had suspected Kelly of robbing them earlier, but Kelly denied everything and claimed she had nothing to do with the attack either. Kelly didn't seem concerned with providing a strong alibi. Yet by this point it was confirmed that at least one of the attackers was a man, and likely had an accomplice. Detectives learned Kelly had recently been battling breast cancer and was recovering from intensive treatment. It seemed unlikely she could physically commit such a crime. Still, the police kept her on the suspect list due to the obvious motive, greed. At this point, detectives also considered a crime of passion. Maybe someone from the couple's past was jealous or out for revenge. But when they looked into Joseph and Olga's former partners, no red flags emerged. Olga had no other relationships in the U.S., and it seemed unlikely a jilted ex would fly across the ocean for vengeance. Joseph's exes were on good terms with him and had moved on, most already married, so that theory was dismissed. The case became more complex. Detectives explored other angles. Could the couple have had enemies they didn't know about? But everyone described them as kind, cheerful, and friendly. Eventually, attention turned to Kelly's husband, Garrett. Perhaps he had carried out the murder on her behalf? But Garrett had a solid alibi, as did Kelly, who claimed she had been feeling unwell and was resting from her treatments that day. This led investigators to question whether Joseph's wealth had been obtained honestly. Some speculated he was involved in shady dealings, which might have caught up with him. Nevertheless, things took a darker turn. Witnesses were found who confirmed the version of events. They stated that Joseph was indeed selling steroids under the table, which were illegal to sell, and he was making huge profits from it. They brought in Joe's business partner, Chris Rivers, as a suspect in the crime. One of Chris's close acquaintances claimed that he had repeatedly spoken negatively about Joe. At one point, he even accused him of embezzlement. This partly stemmed from the fact that the victim was selling steroids through their shared store. But Chris was in debt and Joe wasn't sharing the side income, taking all the money for himself. So detectives came to the doorstep of Joe's partner, Chris. At that time, the two had been working together for over 10 years. They had literally started the business from scratch together, had been very close, and had been through many hardships over the years. But instead of a grieving friend, the police found a rather content Chris who didn't seem the least bit upset about what had happened. And that seemed suspicious. Chris stated that he was supposed to meet the newlyweds at a bar that night but couldn't make it in time because he was busy with other matters. He also mentioned that there were a lot of rumors surrounding Olga, including alleged ties to the Russian mafia, that, according to him, could explain the large income of the couple. Chris hinted and pushed the idea that Joe wasn't exactly clean himself and gave the police several possible leads to follow in search of the killers. Despite growing suspicions about Chris's integrity, all this needed to be verified thoroughly. Eventually, a link between Joseph and the criminal underworld was found and confirmed by several people who knew him. A few years before getting married, Joe ended up in jail after being accused of illegal weapon possession. The incident happened at a bar where a fight broke out, and Joseph grabbed a shotgun from his pickup truck and threatened those involved in the conflict. He didn't make it to the bar. The police arrived in the parking lot just in time and arrested him. As a result, he was convicted. While in prison, Joe made new acquaintances and became close with people who told him about the steroid trade. Joe didn't forget about his new friends, and after being released, he started taking part in the illegal sale of performance-enhancing drugs. He got involved in criminal schemes and became a fairly well-known businessman in that field in addition to his main business. However, it wasn't clear whether this could have been a motive for murder. Could Joseph have crossed someone in this shadowy world? Could Russian mobsters really be involved, dividing up the business in America? These were questions the detectives still had to answer. They looked into a man named Harry Cook. He worked in the city and was interested in becoming a partner in Joe's auto shop. By the time of the murder, he had already invested over $100,000 into the business, which could also have been a motive. Harry also lived near the Conniffs. However, he had a solid alibi for the time of the attack, so the police hit a dead end again. As detectives continued speaking with Joe's business partner Chris Rivers, suspicion grew that the deceased had been stealing money. An investigation into the store's financial records revealed that, despite high income, the business was experiencing serious losses. Expenses were rising geometrically, which looked very suspicious. Money was disappearing into thin air. It became clear that someone was stealing, and the investigation revealed that it was Chris himself. Trying to track where the money was going, police discovered that Chris had an opioid addiction. He was spending all the money on illegal substances, and his own income wasn't enough anymore. It turned out he had been stealing from the store, and thus from his best friend, to buy drugs. This gave the detectives a new main suspect with a strong motive for the crime. It was discovered that Chris's addiction had spiraled out of control. He was using large amounts of illegal drugs and wouldn't stop at anything. He had racked up debts and was stealing from everyone he could. Recently, he had been showing signs of paranoia, claiming that people were following him and trying to kill him. His attempts to cover up the crime only raised further suspicion. The first time he was arrested, it was for possession of steroids, and he turned in his partner, claiming that Joe was secretly selling the drugs through their business without sharing the profits. The steroids were found in the auto shop owned by both Joe and Chris. Chris himself revealed their existence and blamed his late friend. In the end, it turned out that Chris was the one actually selling the steroids to pay off debts he owed to dangerous people. He was accused of organizing a special room in the workshop for storing steroids, which he admitted, saying he did it out of desperation and that Joe knew about it. 2 arrests followed. At this stage, police began to grow increasingly suspicious. Alibi of the main suspect. Chris, the main suspect, willingly provided detectives with surveillance footage from outside and inside his home to prove he was there at the time of the murders. The police even verified that the timestamps on the footage were not tampered with. However, they still didn't believe him and sensed something was off. Detectives then examined Chris's mobile phone usage on the night of the double murder. He made an unusually high number of calls, much more than normal, especially during the time when the attack on the couple took place. Even though the call logs had been deleted, law enforcement was able to recover the call history. Shortly before his business partner and the partner's wife were shot, Chris had been in contact with a man named Josh B., one of his customers who purchased illegal steroids. Josh had previously run off with some of the banned substances. It was proven during the investigation that Josh did not pull the trigger, but he may have played a role in organizing the murder. That night, Josh made several calls to his friends, Dominic and Aaron, who were likely the ones who carried out the execution of the couple. The theory emerged that Chris used Josh to eliminate the newlyweds, but Josh hired 2 of his acquaintances to do the actual shooting instead. The scheme was becoming increasingly complicated. Had the plan gone smoothly, Chris would have received $1 million from a life insurance policy taken out early in the partnership with Joe. Both partners were insured in case of death. However, since Joe had recently married, the beneficiary of the insurance payout was now his wife, Olga, not Chris. That meant Chris had to eliminate both spouses to gain access to the money. This theory was indirectly supported by suspicious conversations that took place the night of the double murder. Chris kept texting his steroid dealer, Josh, nervously asking where he was and when he would be home. The replies were vague. Investigators seized 4 phones from the suspects, and cell tower data confirmed that on September 23, 2013, all suspects were near the crime scene. Even the surveillance footage Chris had offered to prove his alibi backfired. It showed him pacing nervously around his home, constantly checking his phone, clearly awaiting confirmation from the hitmen. Eventually, the investigation got a major breakthrough when Josh B. turned himself in and agreed to a plea deal in exchange for a lighter sentence. He testified that Chris had asked him to kill his business partner and the partner's wife, offering $5,000 as a down payment and promising another $60,000 after the murder. Thanks to his testimony, a year after the cold-blooded murder, Chris Rivers was charged with conspiracy to commit double murder. The others involved were also brought to justice. The trials began 19 months after the investigation started. Chris had planned everything meticulously and tried to mislead the investigation by presenting several red herrings. Joe's criminal past, his involvement in the underground steroid trade, a recent burglary, and even a conflict with his sister. These were meant to confuse the detectives and lead them in the wrong direction. Fortunately, the investigators weren't fooled. They discovered the burglary before the murder was staged by a man sent by Chris, who had been ordered to break into the house and steal a diamond wedding ring. The idea was to frame Joe's sister Kelly as the primary suspect. However, the ring was never found among the couple's valuables, and the plan failed. During the trials, which were held separately, Aaron Thompson pled guilty to double murder and received a 45-year sentence after it was proven he was the one holding the weapon. Chris Rivers received 2 life sentences plus 50 years as the mastermind of the crime. Dominic Benton was acquitted of murder, as he didn't pull the trigger, but he was sentenced to several years in prison for conspiracy and aiding the crime. Josh B., due to his cooperation with the police, was sentenced to just 5 years. Unfortunately, Joe's sister Kelly suffered greatly during the investigation. At one point, the police focused on her as a suspect and nearly charged her with the murder of her own brother. In the end, it became clear that her anger over the wedding ring was not enough to drive her to such a horrific act. At the funeral, she tearfully admitted how much she loved her brother and mourned the loss deeply. If you liked my work, subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and let's discuss this story in the comments. I also recommend watching these videos. Thanks for watching and goodbye.